My name is Helen, I'm 68 years old, and my own children locked me out of the house on Christmas Eve. Before I tell you about how I took back every single penny and my life along with it, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'm a widow living by myself in a quiet little house in Columbus, Ohio. For most of my life, my world revolved around my 3 children. Mark, my oldest and the one I always thought was my rock. Sarah, my only daughter, and David, my baby. Now that I'm retired from the library, those family gatherings are what I live for. They're the bright spots in a calendar that can sometimes feel a little too empty. The whole thing started with a text message. It arrived 3 days before Christmas, lighting up my phone screen as I was wiping down the kitchen counter. It was from Mark. 4 simple words that made my heart swell. Drive safe, Mom. We saved you a place at the Christmas table. Place for me. Those words echoed in my head for the next 72 hours. I replied instantly, "Can't wait, honey. I'll bring the apple pie." Not just any apple pie, but my grandmother's recipe, the one with the hand-fluted crust that they'd all fought over as kids. For the next 2 days, my little house was filled with the scent of cinnamon and baking apples. I carefully packed the pie in its special carrier. I wrapped every single gift, not with fancy store-bought bows, but with simple brown paper and twine. On each one I attached a handwritten tag with a specific memory. For Mark, a note about the time he helped me plant the oak tree in the front yard. For Sarah, a reminder of how we'd sit on the porch swing and she'd tell me all her secrets. I spent an hour finding the perfect gift for my daughter-in-law, Brenda. A silk scarf in her favorite shade of blue. I wanted her to feel like one of my own. Christmas Eve morning, I loaded up my old but reliable Buick. The pie was buckled into the passenger seat like a precious piece of cargo. The trunk was full of presents. As I pulled out of my driveway, I was humming Christmas carols. The 4-hour drive to their place outside Cleveland was slow going, with snow flurries dusting the highway, but I didn't mind. I imagined their faces when I walked in, the kids running to hug me, the warmth of the fireplace, the sound of their laughter. I pulled onto their street at exactly 4 o'clock, right on time. The house was lit up like a Christmas card, glowing against the gray afternoon sky. I could see the flicker of the tree through the big picture window. I could hear music, even a burst of laughter from inside. My heart did a little flutter. They were all here. They were happy. I gathered up as much as I could carry, the pie carrier, a heavy bag of gifts, a bottle of sparkling cider. The cold was biting, nipping at my nose and cheeks as I walked up the shoveled path. I shifted the weight of the bags, balanced the pie, and rang the doorbell. A cheerful little jingle of jingle bells. And then I waited. The music inside didn't stop. The laughter didn't pause. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. I waited another minute, my smile starting to feel a little stiff. Maybe they didn't hear me over the music. I rang it again, a longer press this time. Still nothing. My cheeks were starting to burn from the cold. I fumbled for my phone with numb fingers and called Mark. Straight to voicemail. "Hey honey, it's Mom. I'm on the porch." I tried Sarah next. Voicemail. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. This wasn't right. I peered through a small gap in the curtains next to the door. I could see them. All of them. Mark was pouring Brenda a glass of wine. Sarah was laughing at something her husband said. The kids were playing on the floor. They were all there, just feet away from me. As I stood there shivering, my phone buzzed in my hand. It wasn't a call back. It was a Facebook notification. A mindless habit, I opened it. Brenda had just posted a new photo. My breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of the whole family, gathered around the beautiful dining room table. The candles were lit. The turkey was carved. 8 people. 8 wine glasses raised in a toast. 8 chairs. The caption was a dagger. It read, "A perfect cozy Christmas with the ones who matter most." My heart, which had been fluttering with joy just minutes before, felt like it had turned to a block of ice. I stood on that freezing porch, looking at the picture of my family celebrating inside, and then at the locked door in front of me. 8 chairs. Not a single one saved for me. My son's text message flashed in my mind. "We saved you a place." A cold, horrifying realization washed over me as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. The drive away from my son's house was a blur. I don't remember the roads I took. I just remember the glare of headlights from other cars. Other families heading home from their own warm, happy gatherings. I couldn't go home. The 4-hour drive back to Columbus felt like a journey across an ocean. I couldn't face my own empty house, not yet. Not with the scent of that apple pie still clinging to my coat. I saw the glowing sign for a cheap motel off the highway, a Starlight Inn, and pulled in on autopilot. The girl at the front desk couldn't have been more than 20, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression. She barely looked up as I paid in cash for one night, the crumpled bills feeling flimsy and useless in my hand. "Room 107, she mumbled, sliding a plastic keycard across the worn laminate counter. The room was exactly what you'd expect. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and the sharp chemical scent of an industrial cleaner that failed to mask the room's despair. The bedspread was a hideous shade of orange and brown, a pattern from a decade I tried to forget, and it was rough and starchy to the touch. A single dim lamp on the nightstand cast long, lonely shadows across the room, making the small space feel like a cage. I didn't take my coat off. I just sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, which groaned under my weight. The bag of carefully wrapped presents slumped to the floor beside me with a soft final thud. I should have been crying. A proper soul-cleansing breakdown. I should have been screaming into a pillow. But I felt nothing. It was a terrifying hollow emptiness, like the world had been scooped out from inside me, leaving only a fragile shell. I reached into my purse, my fingers closing around the familiar shape of the little notebook I always carry for grocery lists and reminders. But tonight it wasn't for listing bread and milk. Tonight it was for an accounting, a final reckoning. I opened to a clean page. The pen felt heavy and strange in my hand. At the top of the page I wrote a single word. Mark. My mind, which had been a fog of pain just moments before, suddenly became sharp. Crystal clear. I didn't have to look up bank statements. I didn't need any records. The numbers were etched into my memory like scars, each one tied to a specific hope or a broken promise. Under his name I wrote, down payment on first house, $50,000. I could still see his face that day 10 years ago. He'd hugged me so tight, his eyes wet with tears. "This is because of you, Mom," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "You can stay in the guest room whenever you want. It's your house too." I looked around the dingy motel room, at the water stains on the ceiling. I'd never once been invited to stay the night. To make that payment, I had cashed in some of the stock Daniel had left me, the core of my inheritance, the money that was supposed to see me through my final years. Next line. College fund for his 2 kids. I'd started it the day they were born, a small automatic transfer of $200 every single month from my meager pension. I'd wanted them to have the opportunities one never did, to start their lives without the crushing weight of student loans. I did the math in my head. Over the years, that alone was nearly $50,000. Next, paid off his car loan when he was laid off. $7,000. He'd been so desperate, so full of promises to pay me back as soon as he got a promotion. That was 6 years ago. The promotion had come and gone. The money never did. I turned the page, the cheap paper thin under my fingers. My hand wasn't even shaking. At the top I wrote, Sarah. Her list was longer, filled with smaller, more frequent amounts, a death by 1,000 cuts. Monthly help. $500 since 2018. She called it help with the kids' extracurriculars, but I'd seen the new designer purses on her Facebook page, the family vacations to Disney World and the Caribbean, the ones I only ever saw in pictures. Emergency vet bill for their golden retriever. $3,000. I loved that dog, but I remembered that same year, I'd put off getting a crown on my molar because I couldn't afford the copay. I ate soft foods for months. Her country club membership dues for the first year, $2,500. It's for networking, Mom, she'd insisted, her voice bright and persuasive. It's an investment in my husband's career. I remember thinking at the time that my own husband, Daniel, had built his career with calloused hands and a strong back, not with golf clubs and cocktail parties. Then came David. My sweet, troubled David. His page was a mess of desperate, last-minute bailouts, each one accompanied by a story of bad luck and a promise to do better. Rent checks. Too many to count. Credit card debts. At least $15,000 over the years. The used car I co-signed for and ended up paying off myself. $11,000. I sat there under the buzz of the fluorescent light in the bathroom, and I started to add it all up. My pen scratched across the page. The numbers grew. $100,000. $150,000. When I finally drew a line under the final column, the number staring back at me made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. Over $200,000. Pretty much every penny of the life insurance Daniel had left me, the money that was supposed to be my safety net for a comfortable old age. I had always told myself it was what a mother does. You give. You sacrifice. You love. But looking at that number, looking at the cold, hard facts listed in my own handwriting, I felt a hot flash of shame crawl up my neck. This wasn't love. This was a long-term, one-sided financial arrangement. And I had been a willing participant in my own liquidation. They hadn't just forgotten to save me a seat at the table. They had sold it piece by piece, and I had handed them the cash. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand as they slept soundly in their warm beds, was that this little notebook wasn't an ending. It wasn't a record of my foolishness. It was a beginning. It was an invoice. And it was long past due. The buzzing of the motel's heater was the only sound in the room. A low, monotonous hum that did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. As I sat there staring at the numbers in my notebook, the sterile, anonymous room began to fade away, and my mind drifted back in time. Back to a different kind of Christmas, a different kind of life. I was 38 when Daniel died. It was a Tuesday. One minute he was at the kitchen table, telling me about a problem with some drywall at the construction site. The next he was clutching his chest, his face pale with a surprise that turned to terror. A massive heart attack. No warning, no goodbye. Suddenly, I was a widow with 3 small children, and a mountain of uncertainty that looked as tall and treacherous as the Rockies. Mark was just 10, Sarah was 8, and David was a baby of 3. That first Christmas without him was the hardest. The silence in the house was a physical presence. I remember working my day shift at the library, then going straight to an office park to clean law firms until midnight. My back ached constantly, and I was so tired I felt it deep in my bones. I'd come home smelling of bleach and floor wax, and I'd stand in the doorway of my children's rooms, just watching them breathe, their chests rising and falling in the soft glow of a nightlight. That was my fuel. I was determined to make Christmas feel like Christmas for them. But the funeral had eaten through most of our savings. A few weeks before Christmas, I took my wedding ring, the simple gold band Daniel had saved up for 6 months to buy, to a pawn shop. The man behind the counter had sad eyes. He gave me $300 for it. I told the kids it was being repaired and that I'd get it back soon. They believed me. That money bought a decent tree from the fire department's lot, and a few carefully chosen presents for each of them. I remember Mark, so serious for a 10-year-old, trying to be the man of the house. He made me a card out of construction paper that year. It had a wobbly drawing of our family, the 4 of us, with a big smiling angel that looked suspiciously like his dad floating above us. Inside, in his best printing, he wrote, "You are the best Santa, Mom. Don't be sad." I still have that card, tucked away in the back of my jewelry box, a fragile yellowed piece of paper that holds more value than any diamond. Sarah used to follow me around like a little shadow. She'd leave me dandelions she picked from the cracks in the sidewalk, her small hands always smudged with dirt. She would help me bake Christmas cookies, getting more flour on herself than in the bowl. One year she used her entire allowance, $5 in quarters saved in a pickle jar, to buy me a cheap plastic locket from the dollar store. I wore it for years until the clasp broke. And David, he was my little koala. He'd cling to me, his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck, as if he was afraid I'd disappear too. Every night I would read him the night before Christmas, until he fell asleep, his warm breath on my cheek, his small body a comforting weight against mine. We didn't have much. We lived on casseroles and leftovers. Their clothes were often hand-me-downs from cousins. We never had a fancy vacation. Our big trip for the year was a day at the state park with a picnic basket full of tuna sandwiches and a thermos of Kool-Aid. But we had each other. Our little unit of 4, huddled together against the world. Love wasn't about money then. It was about sharing the last piece of pie. It was about me skipping lunch so they could have second helpings at dinner. It was about the 3 of them piling onto my bed on Saturday mornings to watch cartoons, a tangle of arms and legs and messy hair. I never asked for anything in return. I never expected it. Their happiness was my return. Seeing them grow up, go to college, the first in our family get married, have their own kids. I thought that was the payoff. I thought the foundation of love we'd built in those difficult years was unbreakable. I believe that when you pour that much of yourself into your children, a part of you lives inside them forever. I looked down at the notebook in my lap. $50,000. $500 a month. $15,000. Each number felt like a betrayal, not of me, Helen, the 68-year-old woman, but of that tired, 38-year-old widow who sold her wedding ring so her kids could have a little magic under the tree. Where did those children go? The boy who called me the best Santa? The girl who bought me a plastic locket? The baby who clung to my neck? When did their love get a price tag? A cold, hard thought settled in my chest, as heavy as a tombstone. Maybe it happened the first time I said yes when I should have said no. The first time I paid a bill they should have paid themselves. Each check I wrote wasn't a gift of love. It was a brick in the wall they slowly built between us. I had financed my own exclusion. The first rays of a bleak Christmas morning started to filter through the thin motel curtains. I closed the notebook. The ghosts of Christmas past had vanished. And in their place was a woman who was finally terrifyingly awake. Driving home on Christmas Day was surreal. The highway was nearly empty. Every house I passed was aglow with lights, wreaths on every door. I felt like a ghost, invisible to the world of happy families around me. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, my little house looked dark and cold. The Christmas lights I'd so carefully strung up along the porch railing were not turned on. I couldn't bring myself to flip the switch. Inside, the house still smelled faintly of cinnamon and apples from the pie I'd baked. The pie that was now in a dumpster behind the Starlight Inn. I dropped my purse and keys on the kitchen table and sank into a chair, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. After an hour, maybe two, my phone started buzzing. A flurry of notifications from the family group chat. I braced myself, my thumb hovering over the icon. I had to know. I had to see the full extent of it. I opened it. 32 new messages. My heart pounded as I scrolled up. Not a single one from Christmas Eve asked where I was. They were all from Christmas morning. The first was from Mark. Hope everyone is recovering from the food coma. That turkey was amazing, Brenda. You outdid yourself. Sarah replied with a string of happy emojis. Best Christmas ever. So relaxed. We should do this every year. Then a message from my youngest, David. Totally. Hey, did anyone hear from Mom? Yes, she couldn't make it. That was it. That was the extent of their concern. No one had called. No one had texted me directly. I wasn't a missing person. I was a canceled appointment. An optional attendee who had RSVP'd yes and then failed to show. It was Sarah's next message that felt like a slap in the face. I'm sure she's fine. Probably just got the dates mixed up. You know how she gets. You know how she gets. As if my mind was failing. As if their neglect was somehow my fault, a symptom of my old age. I felt a wave of nausea. Just as I was about to throw my phone across the room, there was a soft knock on the front door. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman in her 70s with worried eyes, holding a container wrapped in a tea towel. Helen, dear, she said, her voice full of genuine concern. I saw your car was gone all day yesterday. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. I brought you some of my pumpkin soup. It's not much, but it's hot. I'm fine, Martha, I lied, forcing a weak smile. Just a change of plans. She looked at me, her gaze lingering a moment too long. She knew I was lying. Well, she said, hesitating, her brow furrowed. I wasn't sure if I should show you this. I know how much you love your family, but I saw it this morning and it just didn't sit right with me. It felt mean. She handed me her phone. It was open to Facebook, to a private community group called Main Street Moms. And there, at the top of the feed, was a post from my daughter, Sarah. My eyes scanned the words, and the floor seemed to drop out from under me. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a victory lap. It was a public celebration of my absence. She had written, Success! We managed to dodge the mom bullet this Christmas. LOL. For the first time in years, a totally drama-free holiday. No endless stories about the good old days. No questions about my parenting, no guilt trips about not visiting enough. My brilliant sister-in-law Brenda came up with the perfect plan and it worked like a charm. She just forgot to give mom the right time. Genius. Hashtag peace on earth. Hashtag sometimes you gotta. Below it, a string of comments from her friends. You're my hero, one wrote. Another said, OMG, tell me your secret. My mother-in-law is driving me insane. The comments were a sea of laughing emojis and knowing winks. They were laughing at me, my love, and my gullibility. My vision tunneled. Brenda came up with the perfect plan. She just forgot to give mom the right time. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. A deliberate, cruel, calculated lie. My daughter-in-law, the one I'd bought that beautiful silk scarf for, had orchestrated my exclusion. And my own daughter had celebrated it, gloated about it to a group of strangers on the internet. They hadn't just left me off the guest list. They had treated my presence as a disease and celebrated finding a cure. I handed the phone back to Mrs. Gable. My hand was perfectly steady. Thank you, Martha, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You were right to show me. I appreciate it. As I closed the door, the last bit of grief inside me flickered and died. It was replaced by something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the feeling of a general standing over a map, the battle lines finally clear. There was no misunderstanding left to clear up. No apology that could ever be enough. The play was over. And it was time to burn down the theater. The next morning I didn't just wake up. I was propelled out of bed by a new steely sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time I didn't feel tired. I felt energized. My first stop wasn't the grocery store or the pharmacy. It was the public library, my old stomping grounds. I walked past the librarians who greeted me by name with a polite nod and went straight to the public computers. For the next hour, I accessed my online banking portal and printed out 5 years' worth of statements. The machine churned out page after page, each one a paper record of my foolish generosity. The stack of paper was thick and heavy in my hands as I carried it home. Back at my kitchen table, I spread the documents out. It looked like the aftermath of a paperwork explosion. I brewed the strongest pot of coffee I could stand, got a red pen from the junk drawer and sat down to work. This was my audit. My final accounting. I went through them line by line. The red pen became my weapon. It felt like I was a detective, uncovering the clues to a crime that had been committed against me for years. I circled a recurring payment of $800. Mark boat payment. A 24-foot fishing boat he used maybe 3 times a year. He'd told me it was a family investment. The only family that ever set foot on it was his, Brenda's, and their 2 perfectly manicured poodles. I remembered the conversation clearly. We were at my house for Sunday dinner, and he was talking about how stressed he was, how he needed an escape. I'd suggested a hobby. I never imagined I'd be funding it. I circled another. $1,200, Sarah. Emergency root canal. 2 weeks later, her Facebook pictures showed her and her husband on a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, smiling, holding up glasses of wine. Best anniversary ever, the caption read. Some emergency. I remembered her call, her voice choked with fake tears, telling me about the agonizing pain. I had transferred the money without a second thought. My pen hovered over a series of withdrawals. David, rent. But I knew my son. I knew it was more likely for concert tickets or a new video game system. I thought of all the times I had gently suggested a financial planning course, only to be met with a sullen, I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. I saw the transfers for the college fund. I saw the insurance premiums. I saw the countless Zelle and Venmo transfers labeled with vague descriptions like groceries or gas. It was all there in black and white. A river of my money flowing out, with nothing but contempt flowing back in return. The final tally was even worse than I had calculated in the motel. With interest I could have earned, and the compounding effect of my generosity, the number was closer to $250,000. The price of my husband's life's work. The cost of my own future. I pushed the papers aside. My hands didn't tremble. I picked up my smartphone, the screen cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. I opened my banking app. My finger went to the transfers and payments section. I scrolled to manage recurring payments. The list was long. It was a digital monument to my own subservience. Sarah Peterson, $500 monthly. My finger hovered over the delete button. I thought of her laughing emoji in the group chat. I thought of her post, dodging the mom bullet. I pressed down hard. A confirmation popped up. Are you sure you want to delete this recurring payment? I tapped confirm without a moment's hesitation. The entry vanished. It was a small, satisfying digital puff of smoke. Mark Thompson, $800 monthly. I pictured him raising a glass of wine at the table I wasn't invited to. I pictured Brenda's smug smile in the photo. Her brilliant plan. Delete. Confirm. Gone. David Thompson family phone plan, $150. Delete. Confirm. He was 36 years old. It was time he learned to pay his own bills. I scrolled down to the last one. My insurance policy. I had added Sarah and her daughter, Chloe, to my excellent retiree dental and vision plan a year ago, when Sarah's husband's company had cut benefits. My heart ached for Chloe. She was an innocent in all this. But Sarah had used her own child's well-being as leverage for years. It had to stop. My thumb paused over the button to remove them as dependents. This one felt different. This wasn't about a boat or a vacation. This was about health. But then I heard Brenda's voice in my head from the Facebook post. Brilliant plan. I thought of Sarah's callous laughter. They had planned my emotional pain. This was just a financial consequence. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. For the first time in decades, my money was my own. The river had been dammed. The silence in my house felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of potential. It was the sound of control. My control. And I knew exactly what my next move was. For the rest of the week I heard nothing. It was a blissful telling silence. It confirmed what I already knew. They only ever called when they needed something. With their allowances scheduled for the first of the month, they were still blissfully unaware that the Bank of Mom had been permanently shuttered. The first of the month was a Sunday this year. I circled it on my calendar. The day of reckoning. I didn't call them. I didn't text. An emotional confrontation over the phone would give them the advantage. They could twist my words, play the victim, hang up. No, this needed to be done on my terms. In my territory. This required a formal declaration of war. So I went to my old desk and took out my good stationery, the thick, cream-colored paper I saved for important correspondence. I wrote 3 identical letters. The content was short, professional, and ice-cold. It was the kind of letter a lawyer would send. Each letter began with a meticulously detailed, itemized list of every major financial contribution I had made to that specific child over the past 10 years, complete with approximate dates and amounts. I attached a summary page showing the grand total. I wanted them to see the numbers, to choke on them. At the bottom of the final page, I wrote a single chilling paragraph. Effective immediately, all financial support, both direct and indirect, has been terminated. Future requests will be denied. A meeting is required to discuss the dissolution of our prior financial arrangements. Your presence is requested at my home this Sunday at 7 p.m. sharp. I didn't sign it "Love, Mom." I simply signed my full name, Helen M. Thompson. I mailed all 3 letters with certified mail, requiring a signature upon receipt. There would be no claiming they didn't get the message. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You might think this was too harsh, too cold. But you have to understand, I wasn't dealing with children who had made a simple mistake. I was dealing with a pack of entitled adults who had conspired to hurt me and celebrated it. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a hostile takeover of my life, and I was finally fighting back. Stay with me here. You need to hear what happened when they walked through my door. The signed receipts came back in the mail on Friday. The silence was broken on Saturday. A flood of confused, then angry texts. From Sarah. Mom, what is this? Is this a joke? I tried to call, you didn't answer. This is insane. From Mark. Got a weird letter from you. Looks like something a lawyer would write. We need to talk. Call me. From David. WTF, Mom? What is this list of numbers? Did you hire a lawyer? I didn't respond to a single one. I let them stew in their confusion and panic for the entire weekend. I imagined the frantic phone calls between them, the accusations, the disbelief. Let them squirm. It was a small appetizer for the main course I planned to serve on Sunday. On Sunday evening at exactly 6:58 p.m., a car pulled into my driveway. Then another. They had come together, a united front. Mark, Brenda, Sarah, and David all walked up my front path. They looked less like concerned children and more like a disgruntled corporate delegation arriving for a hostile board meeting. I opened the door before they could knock. I didn't smile. I didn't greet them. I simply stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. They filed into my living room, the one with the couch I'd paid for and the rug I'd bought, and they sat down without being invited. They looked around, their faces a mixture of annoyance and arrogance. There was no apology in their eyes. There was no remorse. There was only impatience. They sat there staring at me, waiting for me to explain myself, as if I was the one who owed them an explanation. Finally, Mark, my golden boy, the one who always took charge, leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at me not with the love of a son, but with the condescending patience of a boss dealing with a difficult employee. "All right, Mom," he said with a heavy sigh, his voice dripping with patronizing calm. "I think there's been a big misunderstanding here. Why don't you tell us what this is all about? You're blowing this way out of proportion." I just looked at him, my face a blank mask. I let his words hang in the air, let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I had waited my whole life to serve them. I could wait a few more minutes to serve them, they're just deserts. The silence in my living room was thick enough to choke on. They looked at each other, then back at me, clearly expecting me to break, to start crying or yelling. I did neither. I simply sat in my armchair, the one Daniel used to love, and met their gaze with a calmness that seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. Sarah was the first to lose her patience. She tossed the letter I'd sent onto the coffee table. The papers slid across the wood with a slick, dismissive sound. "Seriously, what is this, Mom?" she snapped, her voice high and shrill. "Is this supposed to be some kind of power trip? You're trying to shame us? After all these years, you're throwing money in our faces? You always said you helped us because you wanted to, because you loved us." David, slumped in the armchair, mumbled into his chest, "I never even asked for most of that stuff. You just gave it." But it was Brenda, my daughter-in-law, who delivered the coldest blow. She sat perfectly composed on the couch next to Mark, a small smug smile playing on her lips. She looked at me, her eyes like chips of ice. "Frankly, Helen," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "we just wanted one quiet Christmas. Is that so terrible? You have a tendency to make things dramatic. We were just trying to avoid a scene. That was it. The final piece of the puzzle. The final ounce of my restraint evaporated." I leaned forward in my chair, and when I spoke, my voice was quiet, calm, and absolutely lethal. "A scene, Brenda?" I asked, looking directly at her. "You mean a scene like the one where I stood on your porch in the freezing cold for an hour, with a homemade pie and a bag full of presents? That kind of scene?" Brenda's smile faltered. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "You're right, Sarah," I continued, turning my gaze to my daughter. "I did say I helped because I loved you. I did. But I thought love was a conversation, not a monologue. I thought it was a two-way street, not a toll road where I was the only one paying. Tell me, when was the last time you called me, just to ask how my day was, without a request attached to the end of the sentence?" Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an answer that wasn't there. I looked at David. "You never asked for it? You're right. You didn't have to. You just had to let your rent go unpaid, or your credit card get declined, and you knew I would be there to clean up the mess. That's not asking, David. That's expecting. It's the silent, insidious entitlement of a child who never fully grew up." Finally, I turned to Mark. "My son. My rock. You told me you saved me a place, Mark. I saw the picture. There were 8 chairs at that table. 8. All of them full. You didn't even have the decency to set up a folding chair in the corner just in case. You erased me from your perfect Christmas before I even pulled out of my driveway." I stood up slowly, my joints aching, but I felt taller than I had in years. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the letter Sarah had thrown down. "You all seem to think this," I said, holding up the papers, "is about money. You are mistaken. The money is just a symptom. It's the proof. This," I dropped the papers back on the table, "is about that empty space on your porch. It's about a Facebook post where my own daughter celebrated dodging the mom bullet. It's about being treated not like a mother, but like an obligation. A tiresome, inconvenient, but occasionally useful obligation. I looked at each of them one by one. Their faces were pale, stunned. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "The only difference between last week and this week," I said, my voice ringing with a final terrible clarity, "is that now you can feel my absence too. But you're not feeling it in your hearts. You're feeling it in your bank accounts. The bank of Mom is closed. The services have been terminated. This meeting was just a courtesy notification." I walked to my front door and opened it, letting the cold night air rush in. "This meeting is over," I said calmly. "Now, get out of my house." They left without another word. They filed out of my house like zombies, their faces blank with shock. I watched them get into their separate cars and drive away, their taillights disappearing into the darkness. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, my body finally starting to tremble. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. The anger had burned itself out, leaving nothing but ashes. The next 2 days were a blur of silence. The house felt too big, too quiet. I drifted from room to room, picking things up and putting them down again. I second-guessed myself 1,000 times. Was I too harsh? Did I just destroy my own family over a single holiday? The confident, righteous anger I'd felt during the confrontation had faded, replaced by the familiar, heavy cloak of doubt and loneliness. On the third afternoon, there was a soft, hesitant knock on the door. My heart jumped, thinking it was one of them coming back to either scream or, dare I hope, apologize. But when I opened the door, it was my granddaughter, Chloe. She was standing there alone on the porch, a small pot with a single bright orange marigold in her hands. She was 16, with my late husband's kind eyes and a shy smile. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly, not quite meeting my gaze. I heard Mom yelling on the phone a lot the last few days. I wanted to see if you were okay." Tears pricked my eyes for the first time since Christmas Eve. I stepped aside and let her in. She immediately wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. It was a real hug. A hug that wasn't asking for anything. A hug that was just giving. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice thick. We sat at the kitchen table, the little marigold pot between us. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't mention her parents or her uncles. She just talked. She told me about a boy in her science class, about a book she was reading, about her dream of becoming a veterinarian. After a while, she looked down at the flower. "I used my allowance to buy this," she said. "I know it's winter, but the man at the store said marigolds are tough. He said they can bloom even when it's cold. I thought you might like it." My throat was too tight to speak. I just nodded. "Do you want to plant it?" she asked. We put on our coats and went out to the small garden patch in the backyard, mostly dormant under a thin layer of old snow. We found a spot near the frozen rose bushes that Daniel had planted for me. We dug a small hole in the cold, hard earth with a trowel, our fingers numb. We gently placed the marigold in its new home, packing the soil around its base. Our hands, one old and wrinkled, one young and smooth, worked side by side. As we stood up, brushing the dirt from our knees, Chloe looked at me with an earnestness that was wise beyond her years. "You know, Grandma," she said softly, "you deserve to be happy." That simple sentence from this sweet girl was the absolution I didn't know I needed. It wasn't about being right or wrong. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about deserving to be happy. It was permission to choose myself. Her words didn't magically heal the gaping wound in my heart, but they were like a ray of sunshine after a long, bitter storm. It was a sign that in the scorched earth of my family, one beautiful, resilient flower might still be able to grow. And it gave me the strength to do what I knew I had to do next, not for them but for me. Chloe's visit was a turning point. It was as if that little marigold, standing so bravely in the cold ground, had planted a seed of courage in me as well. The very next week I started making changes. Not small changes but seismic shifts. First, I did something I hadn't done in nearly 40 years. I booked a trip for one. I went to a travel agency and bought a ticket for a month-long train journey along the Blue Ridge Parkway, scheduled for the spring. It was something Daniel and I had always talked about doing someday. I realized someday had to be now, or it would be never. The cost made me flinch for a moment, but then I thought of Mark's boat, and I signed the check without another thought. Next, I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community center. I'd always loved to draw when I was young, but life, marriage, and motherhood had packed that passion away in a dusty attic box. The first class was terrifying. I was surrounded by women who seemed to know what they were doing, while my paper just turned into a mess of muddy brown. But the instructor was kind, and by the end of the session, I had painted a lopsided, but surprisingly cheerful, picture of a sunflower. I hung it on my refrigerator. I started taking long walks every morning. I rediscovered my own neighborhood. I found a little bookstore I'd driven past 1,000 times and spent an entire afternoon inside, breathing in the scent of old paper. I bought 3 novels not because someone had recommended them, but simply because I liked their covers. I was slowly, carefully building a new life. A life that wasn't defined by my role as a mother, a caregiver, or a financial safety net. It was just my life. Some days were lonely. The silence in the house could still be overwhelming. But it was a clean silence now, not one heavy with unspoken expectations. Spring arrived, and with it my train trip. Leaving my house, my town felt monumental. For a month I was just Helen. Not mom, not grandma. Just a woman with a sketchbook and a window seat. I watched the country unfold before me. I saw misty mountains at dawn, quaint little towns tucked into valleys, and endless stretches of green. I ate in dining cars with strangers and heard their stories. I spent my evenings in cozy bed and breakfasts, reading the books I'd bought. I painted. I filled an entire sketchbook with watercolors of rolling hills, rustic barns, and wildflowers. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. They were proof that I could still create something beautiful out of my own 2 hands. I was in a small town in North Carolina, a place called Blowing Rock, sitting outside a cafe and sipping a latte. The sun was warm on my face. I was sketching the old general store across the street, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Then my phone buzzed on the table. For the past few months there had been nothing. No calls, no texts. I had assumed, perhaps naively, that my message had been received, that they were finally learning to stand on their own. But the text was from Sarah. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. The message wasn't an apology. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a demand, wrapped in a thin veil of panicked desperation. And what I read next was so predictable, so utterly shameless, that all I could do was laugh. It was a short, bitter laugh, but it was a laugh nonetheless. I read Sarah's text message twice, just to make sure I wasn't imagining the sheer audacity of it. Mom, I'm so sorry to bother you on your trip, but we have a serious problem. The property taxes are due, and with the insurance premiums we now have to pay ourselves, we're short. We might lose the house if we can't come up with $3,000 by Friday. I know you're angry, but you wouldn't let your own grandchildren become homeless, would you? Please. Just this one last time. The guilt trip was a classic. The invocation of my grandchildren was a low blow, even for her. I didn't reply. I took a sip of my latte, which now tasted a little bitter, and went back to my sketch. 2 days later, as my train was pulling into a station in Virginia, another text came through. This time it was from Mark. Mom, Brenda is threatening to leave me. She says the financial stress is too much. She's talking about divorce, about getting a lawyer. The payment for the kids' private school is due and my commission check was smaller than expected. I need $5,000. You're the only one I can turn to. You can't let my family fall apart. So now I was responsible for his marriage too. The manipulation was breathtaking. Again I read it and then I put my phone away. The last one arrived the following evening from David. His was short and to the point. Mom, I got a promotion at work. But I have to buy a new suit and my car just broke down. Can't start a new position looking like a mess. Just need $1,500. I'll pay you back this time, I swear. The same old empty promises. The same old self-inflicted crises. It was like they were reading from a script they had been using their whole lives. And this, I knew, was the final test. After everything that had happened, after all the boundaries I had tried to set, this was their final attempt to pull me back into the old dance. The old toxic, one-sided tango of their needs and my resources. I spent that entire evening in my hotel room, not wrestling with the decision, but carefully composing my response. This couldn't be emotional. It had to be final. I didn't reply to them individually. That would invite argument and negotiation. Instead, I created a new group message. I added Mark, Brenda, Sarah, and David. I took a deep, steadying breath, and I typed out my final transaction with them. I have received all of your recent requests for financial assistance. My answer to all of them is no. For years, I have served as your emergency fund, your safety net, and your solution for poor planning. That role has been permanently dissolved. Your financial situations, your marriages, and your responsibilities are now entirely your own. I am not a bank. I am not a line of credit. I am your mother, a title I am now reclaiming for myself, separate from any financial function. There are institutions designed to help with financial hardship. They are called banks, credit unions, and financial advisors. I suggest you contact them. From this point forward, any further financial requests sent to this number will be ignored. I truly wish you all the best in learning to manage your own lives. It is the greatest gift I have left to give you. I read it over once. It was clear. It was firm. It was final. There was no anger in it, only fact. I hit send. And then I did something I never thought I would have the strength to do. I went into my contacts. I found Mark's name and I pressed block this caller. I did the same for Brenda. For Sarah. For David. One by one, their names disappeared from my potential call list. The digital ties were severed. The feeling that washed over me was not joy. It was not sadness. It was a profound, earth-shaking sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes after a long and brutal war. The fighting was over. The silence that followed was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of freedom. I had finally closed the account. It's been 6 months since I sent that final text message. 6 months of quiet. 6 months of healing. I never finished that train trip. When I was in Asheville, North Carolina, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt at home. So I stayed. I sold the house in Ohio, the house full of ghosts and memories, and used some of the money to rent a small, sunny cottage with a little porch and a garden. It's all I need. My life now is simple, but it's mine. I wake up when the sun streams through my window, not when an alarm clock tells me to. I drink my coffee on the porch and watch the blue jays in the bird feeder. I paint almost every day. My little cottage is filled with my watercolors. Lopsided sunflowers, misty mountains, and the smiling faces of the women from my art class. I joined a hiking club. Twice a week, I and a group of other retirees explore the mountain trails. We talk about books, our gardens, our grandchildren. We don't talk about inheritances or emergency loans. We just enjoy the fresh air and the good company. Chloe calls me every Sunday. She tells me about her life, her dreams of college, her part-time job at the animal shelter. She tells me her mom and dad are going to therapy, that her Uncle Mark sold his boat, that her Uncle David is finally holding down a steady job. She says things are weird, but quieter. She never asks me for anything. She never asks me to come back. She just calls to say hello, to tell me she loves me. And that is more than enough. I don't know if I'll ever see my children again. I hope they are okay. I hope they are learning, growing, finally becoming the adults I always knew they could be. But their journey is no longer mine to manage. My anger has faded, leaving behind a quiet, settled sadness for what we lost, but also a fierce pride for what I have found. I'm sitting on my porch now, a cup of tea in my hand. In my garden, a patch of bright orange marigolds is in full bloom. A gift from my granddaughter that survived the winter. I have a small wooden table out here, just big enough for one. Sometimes when the evening is nice, I eat my dinner out here. For nearly 70 years, I thought my purpose was to build a big, sturdy table for my family, to make sure everyone had a seat, to keep it laden with food and support. But in my frantic efforts to take care of everyone else, I forgot to save a seat for myself. More than that, I forgot that I deserved a seat at all. This new table, my little table for one, is different. It's not lonely. It's peaceful. It's strong. It's a table that holds my books, my paints, my cup of tea. It holds my peace of mind and my self-respect. This table wasn't a gift. It wasn't an inheritance. It was something I had to build for myself piece by piece. And every time I sit here, I am reminded of the most important lesson I've ever learned. The place you must always save first and foremost is your own. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was important. My question for all of you is this: Have you ever had to build your own table? A moment where you had to choose your own piece over the expectations of others? I would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. Please let's support each other. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You are not alone.